Good morning. Our today's lecture about salivary glands. Lecture outline: general organization, functions of saliva, methods of salivary secretion, the parotid glands, submandibular gland, sublingual gland, minor salivary glands, and some clinical considerations. Starting with the general organization of salivary glands. Salivary glands are compound, tubulo-acinar, merocrine, exocrine glands. Each word of these describing words has a meaning. Compound means more than one tubule entering the main duct. Tubulo-acinar describe the morphology of secreting cells. In other terms, the secretory end pieces, the end pieces of the salivary glands that make the secretions. Some of them are tubular in morphology. They look like tubes. Some of them are spherical in morphology, called acini. Merocrine means only the secretions of the cell is secreted. So the cell doesn't lose anything except the secreted material. Other terms related to other glands include apocrine, like in mammary glands, where the secretory cells lose some part of the plasma membrane alongside the secretions. And in sebaceous glands that are associated with hair, the secretory cells are described as holocrine. Holocrine means the whole secretory cell is lost with its secretions. Exocrine means fluid secreted into a free surface. The opposite of exocrine is endocrine, where the secretions go to the blood. We come back to the term compound. The opposite of compound is simple. Basically, compound means branching. So the duct system of the gland is branched. So all salivary glands have a branched duct system. Sweat glands, they have simple duct, non-branching. That's why they are described as simple glands. Sweat glands are simple, not compound. But all salivary glands are compound glands. Salivary glands have two main components: glandular secretory tissue called parenchyma and supporting connective tissue stroma. The supporting stroma include capsule all around the gland, and from the capsule extend septa that divides the glands into lobes, and the lobes, each lobe is further divided into other smaller septa that divides each lobe into lobules. So from the stroma of the capsule pass septa that divides the gland into major lobes, which are further divided into lobules. Lobes contain secretory units which contain acini positioned around lumen. Acini here refer to secretory end pieces, but to be specific, I prefer to use the term secretory end piece because sometimes these secretory end pieces are tubular when the secretions are mucus secretions, and spherical when the secretions are serous secretions. We will explain the difference between serous and mucus in a minute. Secretory end pieces empty into intercalated ducts, which join to form striated ducts, which empty into collecting ducts. This is the general description of the connection of the secretory end pieces to the duct system. So the secretory end pieces, the cells, the secretory cells of the secretory end pieces empty into the lumen of the secretory end piece, and the lumen leads to intercalated ducts. Intercalated ducts group together and pour into striated ducts. Striated ducts group together into collecting ducts, and collecting ducts include minor collecting ducts, major collecting ducts, and the major collecting ducts group together to pour the secretions into one main excretory duct. This is general, but there are exceptions. This description applies to the submandibular gland and the parotid gland. The submandibular and the parotid have all types of ducts: intercalated, striated, minor collecting, major collecting, and one main excretory duct. But the sublingual gland and the minor salivary glands, they do not have striated ducts, and they do not have one main excretory duct. They have intercalated, minor collecting, and major collecting. Intercalated and striated ducts are intralobular, inside the lobules, while collecting ducts are interlobular, means in the connective tissue septa dividing the lobules. Septa carry blood and nerve supply. Fat cells increase with age at the expense of the parenchyma. If it's at the expense of the stroma, there is no much problem. But here, the increase of fat cells with age is at the expense of the parenchyma. And we know the parenchyma is the secretory part of the salivary gland. So, with age, we expect less salivary secretion, meaning dry mouth, or what's called xerostomia, meaning more problems inside the oral cavity, including caries and periodontal diseases, and also fungal infections. We'll explain that more in the clinical considerations. But here we have an idea that in elderly people, they usually suffer dry mouth, decrease in salivary secretion because of the replacement of a substantial amount of the parenchyma by fat cells. It's an physiologic aging phenomenon. Salivary secretions are under the influence of the autonomic nervous system. So it's not something voluntary. It's involuntary. We cannot control the salivary secretions, like moving your muscle, for example, moving your hand, contracting your muscles, skeletal muscles. These are voluntary, but salivary secretions are not voluntary. They are under the control of the autonomic nervous system. Okay, here we see this part. We see secretory end pieces. In this case, they are spherical in shape. Some of them are spherical actually, and some of them are tubular. The spherical have cells that secrete watery material called serous secretions. They are basically water plus enzymes. And some of the secretory end pieces are tubular, like this one here. They are elongated. These secrete mucus. Sometimes at the end of these tubules, we have serous demileunes, like semicircular arrangement of serous secretory cells. So the tubular secretory end pieces are either completely mucus or mixed mucoserous, means they secrete mucus and serous. In all cases, these secretory end pieces pour their secretions into the lumens of these secretory end pieces, and the lumens group here, it's called canaliculus between cells. The first site of secretion is the canaliculi between the cells, leading, which is basically the lumen, and this lead to intercalated ducts. Intercalated ducts group together to form striated ducts. Striated ducts group together to form collecting ducts, and here it's called excretory duct. You can call it collecting or excretory. Both terms are fine. And we have minor and major collecting ducts. And here the major collecting ducts pour into this duct, which is the main excretory duct. As we mentioned before, main excretory duct and striated ducts are only present in the parotid gland and the submandibular gland. And then the main excretory duct empty the secretions to the oral cavity. In case we do not have main excretory duct, then the major collecting duct will empty its secretions directly to the oral cavity. Acini might be serous, mucus, or mixed. I prefer to use secretory end pieces because acini usually refer to spherical secretory end pieces. So I think we should correct that into secretory end pieces might be serous, mucus, or mixed. Serous secretions are watery secretions. It's basically water plus enzymes. Mucus is a viscous material that mainly contain the protein, the highly glycosylated protein mucin. And when mucin attracts water, it becomes viscous, so the secretion is called mucus secretions. Mixed have both. And we explained that when the secretory end pieces are serous, they are spherical. When they are mucus, they are in the form of tubules. When they are mixed, they are also tubules. At the end, we have serous demillions, cells that produce serous. So the secretion of the mucus tubule plus the serous demillion mixed together in the lumen of the secretory end piece. That's why the secretory end piece is considered mixed. Serous cells produce watery proteinaceous fluid and are the source of amylase. Amylase is one of the example or the main example of enzymes produced by salivary glands. The mucus cells contain protein with more carbohydrates, forming a more viscous mucin-rich product. Mixed acini serous cells form a demillion podocyte mucus cells. Myoepithelial cells. These cells are epithelial cells with contractile ability. They wrap around secretory end pieces like basket-shaped cell, and also wrap around intercalated ducts. So this cell wrap around secretory end piece. They also wrap around the intercalated ducts, and when these cells contract, they push the secretions from the secretory end piece toward the intercalated duct, and from the intercalated duct toward the larger duct, which is striated duct. Here we see a histological section of a salivary gland. This section shows mainly the secretory end pieces. So we are inside lobules. Secretory end pieces are intralobular, inside the lobules. Here you see mucus tubule, in eosin hematoxylin stain. You see mucus secretory cells do not take up the stain. So they appear clear, but not 100% clear. They have foamy appearance. They don't look clear like fat cells. Fat cells are 100% clear in histological sections when the staining is eosin hematoxylin stain. But mucus cells, they appear foamy in appearance because inside each cell we have vacuoles, and the vacuoles are many vacuoles, and the vacuoles are filled with carbohydrate-rich, highly glycosylated mucin. The mucin. The mucin doesn't take up the stain. what takes up the peripheries of the vacuoles. That will lead to this foamy appearance and not the 100% clear appearance. So imagine you have a vacuole like this, the mucin inside. The mucin doesn't take up the stain, it will appear clear, but the periphery of the vacuole take up the stain because it's plasma membrane. And then many vacuoles take up the stain, the peripheries or the circumference of these vacuoles take up the stain, but the inside clear. This will lead to a foamy appearance. We have here mucus tubule. At the end of it, we have serous demilune. So this should be an example of a mixed salivary gland, because when you have serous and mucus, then you are talking about a mixed salivary gland. Mucus tubule, serous demilune. And this secretory end piece is considered a mixed secretory end piece. Here, same thing. You have mucus tubule, at the end we have serous demilune. This secretory end piece is considered a mixed secretory end piece. Look at this one here, this one here. These are spherical and they are not white foamy. These are serous acini or serous secretory end pieces, and they are spherical. It's really hard to find mucus tubules in mixed glands. Mixed salivary glands usually have at the end of the mucus tubules serous demilunes. So the secretory end pieces are also mixed, the majority of them. So it's not easy to find. I don't mean there is none, but it's it's harder to find in histological sections purely mucus tubules in a mixed salivary gland. So here we see that most of the secretory end pieces in this section are mucus. So there is more mucus than serous. But it's hard to judge on this smaller section or part of a section. We need broader image to judge about this gland, whether it's mainly mucus or mainly serous. Salivary glands are classified according to size into major and minor glands. We have three pairs of major salivary glands: parotid gland, submandibular gland, and sublingual gland. The other salivary glands are minor glands. Also, salivary glands are classified according to secretions. We have serous glands, mucus glands, mixed glands. An example of completely serous gland is the parotid gland. And also there is a gland called von Ebner gland, which is a minor salivary gland. So we have one example of major salivary glands as completely serous, which is the parotid, and one example of minor salivary gland that's completely serous, that's called von Ebner gland. And I think you have heard of that when we talked about the circumvallate papillae, which are located just anterior to the junction between the anterior 2/3 of tongue dorsum and the posterior 1/3 of tongue dorsum, where the sulcus terminalis is. So they are just anterior to the sulcus terminalis. These von Ebner glands are associated with the circumvallate papillae. And they are minor glands, their secretions are completely serous. An example of completely mucous glands is only minor salivary glands. We don't have major salivary glands that are completely mucous. The minor salivary glands in the posterior region of the oral cavity are mixed but mainly mucus. They are completely mucus. In the anterior region of the oral cavity, they are mixed but mainly mucus. So, for example, the minor salivary glands in the submucosa of the posterior 1/3 of the tongue, the minor salivary glands in the submucosa of the posterior lateral region of the hard palate, the minor salivary glands in the submucosa of the soft palate, the minor salivary glands in the palatoglossal arch, or the fauces in general, palatoglossal and palatopharyngeal. All of these, because they are in the posterior region, they are completely mucous minor salivary glands. Minor salivary glands in the anterior region of the oral cavity, like the labial glands, the minor salivary glands in the submucosa of the lip, the minor salivary glands in the cheek area, the buccal glands, you can call them buccal glands, in the submucosa of the cheek, the minor salivary glands in the alveolar mucosa, the minor salivary glands present in the floor of the mouth are mixed minor salivary glands. Also in the floor of the mouth there is the sublingual glands, which is one of the major salivary glands. It's also a mixed gland, but it's considered grouped as a major salivary gland. The minor salivary glands that empties at the ventrum, at the anterior region of the ventrum of the tongue, ventral surface of the tongue. This is called, you remember that gland, it's within the substance of the muscle. It's not within the submucosa. This gland is called anterior lingual gland. Anterior lingual gland is a minor salivary gland, and it's mixed mainly mucus. All the mixed glands are mainly mucus. all the mixed minor glands are mainly mucus. Only one gland, but it's not a minor gland, it's a major gland. That's mixed and mainly serous. This is the submandibular gland. Only the submandibular gland is mixed, mainly serous. All mixed glands are mainly mucus. The three mixed glands, we talked about minor salivary glands in the anterior region of the oral cavity. They are mixed. Also the sublingual gland, also mixed mainly mucus. Submandibular gland is mixed, mainly serous. The three major pairs of glands are the parotid, submandibular, and sublingual. We mentioned that before. Minor salivary glands are absent from the gingiva and the dorsum of the anterior two-thirds of the tongue. In the gingiva and the anterior two-thirds of tongue dorsum, we do not have submucosa, so we do not expect to have salivary glands. Always, if you don't have submucosa, then you don't have glands. You don't have minor salivary glands if you don't have submucosa. There is only one exception, which is the anterior lingual gland. Anterior lingual gland is an exception to the rule. It's the gland is located within the substance of the muscle. I'll try to show that on this figure. The anterior lingual gland, it's located somewhere here. It's within the substance of the muscle, and the duct opens to the ventral surface of the tongue. It's called anterior lingual gland, and it's, as we mentioned before, it's mixed, mainly mucus gland. Now I'll talk about salivary secretions. Low level of salivary secretion throughout the day. So we don't have much secretion of saliva throughout the day. The large additions take place at meal times. We need more saliva at meal times. The average flow rate is 0.3 ml per minute. Sublingual and minor glands secrete saliva spontaneously. Spontaneously means they do not need neural messages to secrete. They do that spontaneously. Parotid and submandibular glands are completely nerve mediated. So the secretions in the parotid and the submandibular are under the control, completely under the control of nerve messages, neural messages that tell the gland to secrete or not. Secretion ceases almost entirely during anesthesia. So here we are talking about the subparotid and submandibular, because they are nerve mediated. So when we administer anesthesia in the region, like if the anesthetic solution affects the submandibular or the parotid gland region, then we expect that to have complete stop during the anesthesia period of salivary secretion from the parotid and the submandibular, but not from the sublingual and the minor glands, because these are spontaneous. They are not affected. Cells store and secrete protein by granule exocytosis upon receiving signal. This is about the ways of secretions of the components of saliva. Cells secrete proteins continuously by vesicular mechanism, vesicles traveling directly from Golgi complex to the plasma membrane. This is called the constitutive pathway. Also, transcytosis, where substance present in the interstitial tissue pass across the cell from the basolateral to the apical membrane. The basolateral is away from the lumen, and the apical is the side of the cell that's close to the lumen. Here we have a drawing for a mucus cell and a serous cell. We notice the differences here. The serous cell have round nucleus. Mucus cell has flat nucleus. The secretory vesicles here are called zymogen granules because they contain the zymogens, and you know zymogens are proenzymes. So when they are cleaved, they become enzymes. They are proteins, but they are not highly glycosylated proteins. Here in the mucus cells, we have a special type of protein called mucin. So these are called sometimes mucus vacuoles because they are large. Or you can call them vesicle, that's fine. Mucus vesicles or mucus vacuoles. And the protein here is highly glycosylated. So it has high ability to attract water when it's secreted to the outside, meaning outside the cell. When it comes in contact with free surface, the lumen in this case, it attracts water and it becomes very viscous, which then it's called mucus. So mucin plus water equals mucus. The parotid gland, now we'll talk about gland by gland. The parotid gland is the largest of the salivary glands. It has defined capsule. This gland is considered completely mucus. This gland, the parotid gland, is completely serous. But sometimes you may find occasional mucus cells. That's why sometimes they refer to it as mainly serous. It's fine if you call it completely serous because the vast majority of the secretory end pieces, the secretory cells, are serous. Septa divide the gland into lobes, and then lobes are further divided into lobules. The septa contain blood vessels, nerve, and collective ducts. Collective ducts, same as collecting ducts, and you can call them excretory ducts as well. The lumina of the acini are very narrow. Here, in case of the parotid, you can call them acini, because all the secretory end pieces, let's say almost all the secretory end pieces, are serous and they are spherical in shape. Here we see all this material here are secretory end pieces, serous acini. These are fat cells. This is characteristic shape of fat cells. They are clear cells. And remember that those increases with age. So the older the person, you expect to find more fat cells. And this is a duct. What we can say about this duct, it's intralobular because it's not surrounded by a substantial amount of connective tissue. We don't find substantial amount of collagen fibers around it. This means that this duct is surrounded by secretory end pieces. Means we are inside the lobule. This is an intralobular duct. And intralobular ducts, we have two types, either intercalated or striated. In case of the parotid and submandibular, we have two types of ducts intralobularly. We have intercalated or striated. Then we should know the difference between the morphology or the characteristics of intercalated ducts and striated ducts to tell the difference. But here, quickly, if you see that the lumen is wide and the wall is light, I mean the cells that make up the ducts light in staining because there is more cytoplasm compared to the nucleus in striated ducts than compared to the intercalated ducts, then it's striated ducts. That's why here they are labeled as striated ducts. You see here, more light. The duct is more light because if you take each cell of the lumen, the cytoplasm is more than the nucleus. And in the intercalated duct, most of the cell is occupied by the nucleus, so they appear darker because the nuclei have darker stain than the cytoplasm. Serous cells of the parotid gland or any serous cell in any salivary glands, they look the same. The cells have granular appearance. Why? Because they have zymogen granules. Granules near the luminal side of the cell. They are getting ready to be secreted. Round prominent nuclei basally located. So this is very important. The nuclei are round to distinguish them from mucus cells. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to tell, especially in a case like this where the serous cells empty their secretions, so they don't appear dark when they retain their secretions. That's why sometimes you get confused if these cells are serous or mucus. So it's advised to look at the nucleus. When the nucleus is round, then it's serous cells. When the nucleus is flat, it's mucus cell. Don't look at one cell, look at the majority. Because there are some cells with a flat nuclei. These are myoepithelial cells. They are not mucus cells, but they are not many. That's why we always look at the majority. So if you see the majority are round nuclei, then these are serous secretory cells. Serous cells of the parotid and in general are wedge-shaped cells that surround the lumen. So the shape is wedge. This shape is called wedge shape. Basal lamina separate the cell from the connective tissue. So here is the basal lamina. Separate the cell from the connective tissue. Because this cell is epithelium, and underneath we have connective tissue. Between epithelium and connective tissue, we should have basal lamina or basement membrane. Canuliculi between cell join. There are canuliculi between the cells, and these canuliculi join together to form the lumen, or empties into the lumen, both lined with microvilli. So the canuliculi and the lumen are lined by microvilli. These structures here, they are tiny extensions. Desmosome, we have desmosomes between the cells like these. We have tight junctions like this one here, it's tight junction, and we have gap junctions, which is chemical coordinations between the cells. Water pass across the cell transcellularly and between the cells paracellularly. Protein components of the saliva are packed into granules for exocytosis when required. The vesicles mature and become more electron dense as they move toward the luminal end of the cell. The appearance of serous cells varies with the activity variation of the cell. Resting cells retaining their filled granules have numerous, they stain darker because they have numerous zymogen granules containing an active precursor. When they empty their secretion, they appear lighter. The nerve supply of the parotid, as we mentioned before, parotid gland, submandibular gland are nerve mediated. Their secretions is nerve mediated, and they are under the control of the autonomic nervous system. Autonomic nervous system include sympathetic and parasympathetic fibers. Sympathetic and parasympathetic fibers innervate the acini. Nerve endings, we have nerve endings between the basal lamina in direct contact with the cell membrane. These are called the hypolemmal nerve fibers. Other endings remain beneath the basal lamina called epilemmal nerve fibers. Parasympathetic drive causes fluid formation. Sympathetic drive increases the output of performed components. Both cause the contraction of myoepithelial cells. So in both cases, we have contraction of myoepithelial cells, so we expect that pushing of the salivary secretions from the lumen of secretory end pieces toward the intercalated duct. Now we'll talk about the duct system of the parotid gland. Remember that parotid gland, submandibular gland have all types of ducts. The smallest one is the intercalated, then we have striated, then we have minor collecting, major collecting, then one main excretory duct. Starting with the intercalated ducts, the smallest, intercalated ducts lead from serous acini into striated ducts. They lead from the lumens of the secretory end pieces to the striated ducts. They are compressed between acini, compressed between secretory end pieces, uh, and that's why these are intralobular, because they are between the secretory end pieces, lined by cuboidal epithelial cells, and sometimes they are flat, sometimes cuboidal, sometimes appear flat. This is the lining of the duct. Prominent nuclei, scanty cytoplasm. So most of the cells that make the intercalated duct, they are so most of the cell, most of these cell, like each of the cells that make the intercalated duct has the majority of it occupied by the nucleus, so they appear dark, have only little cytoplasm. A cytoplasm is lightly stained cytoplasm. So the general appearance of these ducts are dark appearance because the majority of each cell is nucleus, and they are compressed. They appear compressed between the secretory end pieces. This is secretory end piece, secretory end piece, secretory end. All of these are serous acini in this case. And here we have intercalated duct. This is the cell of makes the lumen of intercalated duct. The cells look like this. See, most of the cell is occupied by the nucleus. Smooth luminal and basal surfaces, meaning no microvilli and no enfoldings. Desmosomes between the cells, occasional granules, limited number of organelles. They may act as stem cells. The cells of the intercalated duct, they may act as stem cells to replace what? To replace the cells of the secretory end pieces, and also to replace the cells of striated ducts. So the nearby neighboring structures for intercalated ducts are secretory end pieces and striated ducts. So they may act as stem cells to regenerate the secretory cells and the cells of striated ducts. Several acini drain into each duct. In the parotid gland, they are long, narrow, and branching. This is important, and this is a difference between the intercalated ducts of the parotid as compared to the submandibular. It's easier to find an intercalated duct in a parotid gland section. Why? Because they are long and branching, so you can easily find them. But they are, it's harder to find an intercalated duct in a submandibular gland section because they are short. Now we'll talk about the features of the striated ducts in the parotid gland as compared to the intercalated ducts of the parotid gland. They are longer and more active. They have large cytoplasm. That's why they appear light, as compared to the dark appearance of the intercalated ducts. They have large spherical centrally located nucleus. They are highly polarized cells. These are striated ducts in the parotid. See, the nuclei are almost centrally located. They have wide lumen. They have substantial amount of cytoplasm. That's why they appear lighter. Continuing with the striated ducts of the parotid, this cell is an example of a cell from the wall of striated ducts. Nucleus centrally located, substantial amount of cytoplasm, so more cytoplasm than nucleus. You see they are polarized. We have basal enfoldings. Inside these folds we have lots of mitochondria. Here there is an activity that needs lots of energy. And here is the surface. It has small microvilli. So we have microvilli on the luminal surface, striations on the basal surface. Striations represents infolding into the cell membrane. Vertically aligned mitochondria between the infoldings. We have chromosomes between the cells. The cells are involved in active transport. Active means needs energy, and it means against the concentration gradients. So the passive transport is from the higher concentration to the lower concentration. But when you want to move things from low concentration side to the higher concentration side, then you need energy. And this is what's taking place in striated ducts. So they act in electrolyte reabsorption of sodium and chloride and secretion of potassium and hydrogen carbonate. And all of these are against the concentration, from the low concentration to the high concentration. So that's why it needs energy. That's why we have lots of mitochondria in striated ducts. Reabsorption is against the gradient, thus needs energy. Converting isotonic or slightly hypertonic fluid into hypotonic. So when we reabsorb sodium and chloride to the inside of the cell, the luminal material, the saliva and the lumen, is modified to become hypotonic instead of being isotonic or slightly hypertonic. Small secretory granules on the luminal side of these cells. These secretory granules contain epidermal growth factor and kallikrein, which is a subgroup of serine proteases. The striated ducts in the parotid are less abundant compared to the submandibular gland. That's why it's easier to find a striated duct in submandibular gland than the parotid, because they are more abundant in the submandibular. Striated ducts lead to minor collecting ducts, or they call them minor excretory ducts. Okay, now we'll talk about the collecting ducts of the parotid. As we explained before, we have minor collecting ducts, major collecting ducts, and the one main excretory duct. Columnar collecting ducts have a columnar unstriated layer. This applies for the minor collecting ducts. The minor collecting ducts have simple columnar epithelium. Major collecting ducts, they have pseudostratified columnar, but pseudostratified columnar epithelium. So we have some basal cells, but not in a form of a complete layer of basal cells. So when you say may have a layer of basal cells, this is referring to the major collecting ducts. And this layer is not complete in the majority of major collecting ducts. The main parotid duct, the main excretory duct of the parotid, has two layers: the mucosa and outer connective tissue adventitia. The mucosa include epithelium plus lamina propria. The epithelium in this case is stratified columnar epithelium. You see we have two rows of nuclei here. This is one row, this is another row. This row is for the basal cells. This row of nuclei is for the basal layer, and the second row is for the columnar cells which form the second layer. So this is classified as stratified columnar. The main parotid duct, or the main excretory duct of the parotid, has a stratified columnar epithelium, except near the termination, where it empties into the oral cavity. The epithelium becomes like the oral cavity epithelium, which is stratified squamous epithelium, non-keratinized, of course, because it empties into the buccal mucosa, and the buccal mucosa is non-keratinized. This is a general notice about all ducts. All ducts, whether it's a main excretory duct or a major collecting duct, when it empties into the oral cavity, they turn their lining into a stratified squamous epithelium to become like the epithelium of the oral cavity. By the way, the major collecting duct of the parotid, the main parotid duct, is also called Stevenson's duct. Now we'll talk about the myoepithelial cells. Like this cell here, it has a flat nucleus, it has multiple branches, wrap around secretory end pieces, and wrap around intercalated ducts. They are epithelial cells with contractile elements. When they contract, they push the secretions from the secretory end pieces toward the intercalated ducts, and from the intercalated ducts toward the larger duct, which could be a striated duct in case of the submandibular and the parotid, and in the others would be a minor collecting, the intralobular minor collecting duct. They are called basket cells as well. These lie between the basal lamina, the myoepithelial cells lie between the basal lamina and the membranes of the secretory cells, and intercalated ducts. They are dendritic cells. They have branches. They have cellular extensions with radiating processes. Longer around intercalated ducts with a fewer shorter processes. So there are differences in shape between the myoepithelial cells surrounding secretory end pieces and those surrounding intercalated ducts. They contract in response to sympathetic and parasympathetic stimuli. They have flat nucleus, as you see here. They have few protein synthesizing organelles, numerous actin microfilaments, 4 to 8 micron diameter. They have desmosomes linking them to secretory cells, like these desmosomes. They have gap junctions, hemidesmosomes with the basal lamina. They express cytokeratin 14, which proves their epithelial origin. So any cell that have cytokeratin, then it's epithelial cell. Functions of myoepithelial cells: accelerate the initial outflow of saliva, reduce luminal volume, contribute to the secretory pressure, support parenchyma, reduce back permeation of fluid, helps overcome peripheral resistance, helps secretory cells expel their content, milking of extracellular fluid, and assisting its passage through tight junctions. Now we'll talk about the submandibular gland. It's a major salivary gland and it's mixed but mainly serous. It's the only mixed gland that is mainly serous. The rest of mixed glands are mainly mucus. It's the second largest gland. The largest is the parotid. It's mixed seromucus. Seromucus means more serous than mucus. The serous ratio to mucus is 7:3, meaning 70% serous, 30% mucus. So 70% of the secretory end pieces are serous and 30% of the secretory end pieces are mucus. And this is reflected into the secretions. So we expect the secretions to be 70% serous and 30% mucus. It has a capsule like any salivary gland, and its serous acini are similar to those of the parotid. This is a section of the submandibular gland. This stain is different from eosin hematoxylin stain. In this stain, we see the mucus cells or the mucus secretory end pieces are stained pink in color, while the serous cells or serous secretory end pieces are stained brown. You see the majority taking brown stain, and the minority is taking the pink stain. We have fat cells, clear. Regardless of the stain, they always appear clear, fat cells. We have striated duct here. Let's look at the large lumen, light appearance of the duct. As we mentioned before, it's easier to find a striated duct in the submandibular than intercalated. Intercalated are short in the submandibular, and striated ducts are abundant. So it's easier to find a striated duct than intercalated duct. Mucus cells, and this description applies to mucus cells in all salivary glands. not only the parotid, not only the submandibular gland. Mucinous cells appear paler than serous cells. The nuclei are compressed basally. Serous demillions are crescent-shaped serous cells at the end of mucous tubules, mucous secretory end pieces, and they are present in the submandibular, and they are present in the sublingual gland, and they are present in the mixed minor salivary glands. Mucous cells stain with alcian blue and pass stain, periodic acid Schiff. Eosinotoxin stain doesn't stain mucous cells. So we have two stains that highlight mucous cells, alcian blue and periodic acid Schiff, pass stain. Here we have a section of the parotid, of the submandibular gland. The majority is serous, secretory end pieces. Minority mucous secretory end pieces. Intercalated duct, the dark duct, is short. Most of the ducts, intralobular ducts, are striated ducts. Continuing with the cells in the secretory end pieces of the submandibular glands, serous cells have been shown to align with the mucous cells around a common lumen. Conventional tissue preparation lead to the mucous cells pushing serous cells aside toward the basal side of the acinus. Distension of mucous granules also pushes the nucleus basally. More conspicuous Golgi apparatus in comparison to the serous cells. More carbohydrates linked to protein. So here we have in mucous cells more Golgi apparatus than in serous cells. As we know, Golgi apparatus is involved in glycosylation, post-translational modifications of proteins. And here, mucin protein is highly glycosylated, so we need more Golgi apparatus in mucous cells than serous cells. Pale secretory granules that discharge by exocytosis. These pale secretory granules are the mucous vacuoles or the mucous vesicles that contain mucin. Now we'll talk about the duct system of the submandibular. Duct system is similar to the parotid, very similar to the parotid glands. We have intercalated ducts, striated ducts, minor collecting, major collecting, and one main excretory duct. But there are some differences. Intercalated ducts are much shorter in the submandibular compared to the parotid, difficult to locate in routine sections. Striated ducts are longer and more obvious in the submandibular compared to the parotid. Here in this section, we see here is this type of stain mucous secretory end pieces pink, and the serous secretory end pieces as brown. So you see here the majority is brown. The majority in this section is brown more than pink. We exclude fat and ducts from the comparison. So we are just comparing secretory end pieces to each other. So we have a majority of serous secretory end pieces compared to mucus. And so this should be from the parotid. From the submandibular gland. Fat cells, clear. This is striated duct. It's also striated duct. Now we'll talk about the sublingual gland. It's made up of one major sublingual gland in addition to 8 to 30 minor glands. Each of the glands has its own duct system and emptying into the sublingual fold in the floor of the mouth. The major part of the sublingual gland is mixed mucoserous gland, but mainly mucus. Groups of pale mucus cells and occasional serous acini. Demilunes similar to the submandibular gland. Less developed duct system. No striated ducts, no striations, sodium-rich saliva. Smaller parts drain into smaller ducts. So the sublingual gland is a major salivary gland, and it's mixed mucoserous. The majority is mucus, the minority is serous. So the secretory end pieces in the sublingual gland have three types. We have serous secretory end pieces, we have mucus secretory end pieces, and mixed secretory end pieces. The mixed is mucus tubules plus serous demilunes. Now these secretory end pieces empty into the lumen of the secretory end pieces. The lumens gather together into intercalated ducts. The intercalated ducts pour into minor collecting ducts. We call them intralobular minor collecting ducts. Then the minor collecting ducts pour into, again, minor collecting ducts, but they are called interlobular minor collecting ducts. Then the interlobular minor collecting ducts pour into major collecting ducts. Then the major collecting ducts empties into the oral cavity. Here we don't have one main excretory duct for the sublingual gland and its associated minor glands. That's why we have multiple major collecting ducts emptying into the oral cavity, each one by its own. In some references you find that they talk about Bartholin's duct. Bartholin's duct is the major collecting duct for the largest part of the sublingual gland. They call it Bartholin's duct, but it doesn't group all the major collecting ducts of the sublingual gland associated glands in the region, the associated glands with the main, let's say, the mother gland. This is called the sublingual gland, and there are associated multiple minor salivary glands with it. Each of these open on its own. They do not group together into one main excretory duct. So it's a little bit confusing, but I hope that we clarified it enough. The sublingual gland secretions are sodium rich. Why? Because they don't have striated ducts. Striated ducts make the secretions hypotonic. But if we don't have striated ducts, then the saliva is not, the sodium is not reabsorbed, so the saliva will be sodium rich. either isotonic or slightly hypertonic, but not hypotonic. This is a section of sublingual gland. You see here the majority in this section is mucus, and the minority is serous. This representation shows serous secretory end pieces, serous acini, spherical, wrapped by myoepithelial cells. This is mixed secretory end piece. We have mucus tubule, and here serous demilune. These are serous cells. These are mucus cells. This is the lumen. Lumen lead to intercalated ducts. This part is intercalated ducts. This is striated duct. Now I'll talk about minor salivary glands. Location of minor salivary glands we have in the submucosa of the oral side of the cheek. These are called buccal glands, buccal minor salivary glands. Labial glands in the submucosa of the oral side of the lip. Palatal glands we have in the posterior lateral region, in the submucosa of the posterior lateral region of the in the submucosa of the posterior lateral region of the hard palate, and in the submucosa of the soft palate. Palatoglossal glands and lingual glands. Lingual glands, as we explained before, we have minor salivary glands in the posterior 1/3, in the submucosa of the posterior 1/3 of the dorsal side of the tongue, and we have the anterior lingual gland, which is located within the substance of the muscle, and it empties to the ventral side of the tongue. Minor salivary glands, as we explained before, if they are in the anterior region of the oral cavity, then they are mixed, mainly mucus. If they are in the posterior region of the oral cavity, then they are completely mucus. Vulvar gland is a special case. It's a minor salivary glands that's completely serous, and it's associated with the circumvallate papillae, as we explained before. Here, looking at this section here the epithelium is stratified squamous epithelium, and you can see it's keratinized. And the radial ridges of this epithelium are square in shape. This is characteristic of hard palate, the epithelium of the hard palate. You have lamina propria about the thickness of the epithelium. Then you have submucosa, and the submucosa contains this structure, which is a minor salivary glands, completely mucus, because we are in the posterior region. We have bone here, which is the palatine bone that provides support for the hard palate. Here, see von Eppner gland. These are muscle fibers. These are mucous minor salivary glands in the posterior 1/3 of tongue dorsum. And the vulnerable glands are at the junction between the anterior 2/3 and posterior 1/3. So this is direction is for the more posterior, and here more anterior, because these glands are present in the posterior 1/3 of the tongue dorsum region. Clinical considerations: xerostomia. What's xerostomia? Xerostomia means dry mouth, decrease in salivary secretions, significant decrease in salivary secretions. Causes of xerostomia: old age. Why? Because of the replacement of the parenchyma by fat cells. So we have less secretory cells, more fat, and end result less saliva. Some medications lead to, as a side effect of some medications, lead to decrease in salivary secretions. Radiotherapy in cases of cancer patients, when they use radiotherapy in the head and neck region, this will lead to irreversible damage of salivary glands and lead into xerostomia. There is a syndrome called Sjogren syndrome, and this syndrome is associated with damage to the salivary glands, also damage to the lacrimal glands as well. So they have dry eyes and a dry mouth. Xerostomia results. So this is problematic. When we have xerostomia, then we have problems. These problems include into candidal infections inside the oral cavity, severe periodontal disease, and more caries. So we need a solution. And the solution, if the xerostomia, it's not like a temporary thing, like for example a side effect of some medications, then these medications, upon consultation with the physician, may be changed to other medications with less side effects of xerostomia. But in other cases, you need to use artificial saliva because, for example, radiotherapy, it's irreversible damage. Sjogren syndrome, it's an autoimmune disease that damages salivary glands as well. So in these cases, we need artificial saliva. Sialolithiasis or sialoliths, it's formation of a stone usually in the duct, in the main excretory duct of major salivary glands, particularly the parotid duct and the submandibular duct, because these two major salivary glands, they have one main excretory duct. Formation and this stone need to be surgically removed because it's very painful and leads to serious inflammation to the patient, because the saliva can't come out, it will be retained inside the gland itself. I remember something that the main excretory duct of submandibular gland is called Wharton's duct, And the main excretory duct of the parotid gland is called Stevenson's duct. Thank you very much for listening, and next week we will have our last lecture during this semester, which is about the temporomandibular joint. Take care, and we will talk to you next week. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye bye.